The Law and You, a look at laws in St. Vincent and the Grenadines which affect our daily lives. The Law and You, presented by lawyer panel P.R Campbell QC and brought to you on SVG-TV as a public service.
Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, boys and girls, greetings. Welcome to another presentation in this public service nation-building series, The Law and You. This is program number 872, coming to you on Monday, the 14th of August, 2017. On this program, I will speak to you on the topic Studying Abroad, Part 1. But before getting into the topic, a few preliminary comments. Firstly, condolences go out as usual to all families which have suffered recent bereavements. And in that connection, I say thanks on behalf of the entire Campbell Mason family for the very lovely turnout yesterday afternoon at the funeral service of our relative, Miss Dolores Campbell. Very first time I had the privilege of going into the newly built Barley Evangelical Church just below the primary school, the school I attended from the time it was opened in January 1951. And the Barley Evangelical Church is very lovely built, very spacious and very cool. I would like to commend the authorities, and let me say thank you especially for the words of comfort by Brother Ian Quao, who brought the message during the funeral service yesterday afternoon. And let me thank those brethren from St. Elizabeth Cathedral, Belmont, who surprised me by bringing down a very big trip from Belmont to be with the Campbell family in solidarity yesterday afternoon. Belated congratulations to Dr. George Frederick, Bishop Dr. George Frederick, and Lady Elsie Frederick on celebrating 50 years of ministry, which I read about in the newspapers. Congratulations to both of them, extremely worthy brethren. And of course, you have seen Dr. George Frederick on Encounter even before the Law and You started. And let me say hello to the brethren on Encounter. I got close to the Frederick family because for a number of years, one of their daughters, Ramona, worked with me in my legal chamber. She studied in my chambers when she was doing her studies and then joined me when she was called to the bar as junior counsel, now working abroad. Final preliminary. As I have been telling you these past 2 Monday nights, Bishop Dr. Cecil George Riley and the team of evangelists from the Freedom Hall Churches of God here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, having started their general convention last evening, which of course I missed because there was a funeral in Barley. But hopefully I'll be with them tonight. And they will be having the week of convention services, but on Wednesday night they will be going to Spring Village to fellowship with the folks in Spring Village. And on Friday they will make history by having their first open-air service. This time it will be at the Hard Court in Bayaboo. So, Friday evening, 7 o'clock, Bayaboo Hard Court. All brothers and sisters from Bayaboo and all the surrounding areas would be invited to that evening of service, led by Bishop Dr. Cecil George Riley, and I'm looking forward to being there if it be the will of the Lord. Well, that is all I will bring to you by way of preliminary remarks this evening, because I want to go straight into the topic, studying abroad. This is a topic that I am well qualified to speak on. I myself studied in 3 different countries. I first studied in Canada, thanks to the generosity of the government and the people of Canada. Then I studied in Barbados when I went to UWI Cave Hill for 3 years, and then lectured in Barbados for 1 year. And then I studied in England for a total of 5 years. But in addition to myself having been a student abroad, every one of my children have studied abroad at higher levels. Firstly, my daughter Denise, she lives in Canada and she has done all her higher studies in Canada. And then all my other children have studied in Jamaica, Barbados, England, and latterly in Cuba. And the son of mine, Daniel Tambo, who studied in Cuba, is now studying in New Zealand, doing his master's in engineering. So I can tell you about studying abroad, and as usual, as I normally do around this time practically every year, I remind our students of some of the things they should be aware of when they go to study abroad. Firstly, if you go abroad as a student, as opposed to a migrant worker, you have gone abroad for the specific purpose of bettering yourself educationally. You have gone to study. And you must never, ever forget that objective. You have gone to study. Most of you would go abroad to study with the intention of coming back home, but some of you would be simply studying and then you go wherever the good Lord takes you. First thing you must always remember when you are studying outside St. Vincent and the Grenadines is that you are a guest in somebody else's country. And therefore it behooves you to conduct yourself as not just a guest, but an honored guest. You have to respect the laws of the country that you have gone to study in. You have to respect the customs and traditions of the country. You have to respect the government and governmental authorities of the country. Now, for those who go nearby in the Caribbean, like Cave Hill or Mona, Jamaica, or other places in Jamaica, or Trinidad, or some people have now gone to Guyana, or elsewhere in the Caribbean, you would be familiar with practically all of the culture and social and administrative structures of those countries. So most of what I have to say would not really apply to you if you're studying nearby, although some of it will apply to you. I am concentrating on those who study outside the Caribbean. Now, most of our students outside the Caribbean will be found between the United States of America, Canada, and England. Outside of those three countries, you would find Vincentians, but not in the concentrated numbers you will find in America or Canada or England. Two challenges will face you throughout your studentship. The first, naturally, would be the challenge of the educational workload that you have to cope with, your studies. But a significant challenge to you would be the management of finances. Many of you will be fortunate enough to enjoy scholarships. Some of you may not be so fortunate. You may get some assistance, but you may find yourself in a position where you are required to finance your studies by yourself and your family. Self-financing students really have it rough, and you must be prepared to meet rough times. Unless you come from a family which is very wealthy and your parents can afford to, deposit money in your bank account very regularly in sums adequate for all your needs, unless you're in that category, you would be in the struggling category. And it is no fun to be struggling financially while you attempt to study abroad. Many persons have to try and get a part-time job while they are studying to make ends meet. If you find yourself having to work part-time and yet in full-time studies, then you really have it rough. And the thing is, when you go through that and you graduate and you come back to St. Vincent, people who don't know what you have gone through may not really understand what you have survived in order to better yourself educationally, to come home, to lend your shoulder to the wheel of development. And my congratulations go out to those graduates who have studied either on their own or mainly on their own and have got their qualifications and are back home. These days, it is easier for students to get financial assistance, albeit by loans, student loans, but student loans have to be repaid. As I mentioned last week, I commented on a topic which was recently in some controversy in St. Vincent and the Grenadines about the statistic which was broadcast that 25% of students who are back home working and who took out student loans organized by the governmental authorities are not paying back their loans or not paying back regularly. Again, I take this opportunity to implore you, I beseech you, if you have borrowed money from the student loan fund to study abroad and you get qualified and you come back and you are working and getting a salary, please make the repayment of that loan your number one priority, because that money has to go to help somebody else in the future to get a chance. And if you don't pay back your loan, you are potentially humbugging somebody else down the road from getting money to borrow. I say that by the way. But let us return to the situation where you find yourself abroad studying and you have certain challenges. Now, the challenges would depend on where exactly you are. You might be in a place where there are lots of Vincentians, so you run into friends and relatives and you're an easy touch of home, and you don't feel the sort of pressures of loneliness which you can feel in places where there's hardly any Vincentian around. I remember when I went to Canada in September 1965 to the University of Saskatchewan in Saskatoon. I was extremely fortunate to meet at that university 3 Vincentians senior to me, older than me. And they were the only 3 Vincentian students in the whole of Saskatoon. And they took me in naturally, not literally, because I lived first on campus and then in a house with a group of Africans, but at least they were able to shoulder my burdens, as it were, and break me in and assist me. Mr. Leroy Scrub, Mr. Burton Bailey of Georgetown, of the Bailey family, you know. I haven't heard from Lorraine Bailey in quite a long time, but the Bailey family from Georgetown, Leroy Scrub and his family, and Miss Monica Sandy, whose father had taught me in the early days of my studentship as a primary school student in Barley, Teacher Sandy. So between Monica and Bert and Leroy, they took excellent care of me. But they were the only other Vincentians at the time in the University of Saskatchewan. But you may find yourself with many other Vincentians around you, and that is a comfort. If you're in Toronto, Montreal, Halifax, Nova Scotia, and not to mention being in New York or Washington, Miami. Yeah, if you find yourself in some of the far-flung states of America, the Midwestern states, and the states on the far west, well then you may only have a few Vincentians around. If you find yourself in England, you're sure to have relatives and many friends within easy touch. It is important to have this network of comradeship while you are a student. Not only you have opportunities to socialize, and believe you me, as a student, you need some socializing, otherwise you go crazy with studying if you're a conscientious student. But if you find yourself in foreign countries where there are few or hardly any Vincentians around, then it's a different story. You are wholly dependent on making new friendships. But the fewer Vincentians around in the environment you find yourself, the more you have to keep your eyes open. And for those students who go and study in a place where there's hardly any Vincentian, there are certain elementary precautions you should take. First of all, since it is hardly likely that we would have a consular presence in that country, that is, no embassy, no consulate for St. Vincent and the Grenadines, you ought to make yourself known to the embassy of a friendly country. And I know for a fact that the British embassy in every country would be happy to take cognizance of the presence of any Vincentians studying in that country, so that if you get into difficulties, you run into trouble, they at least would know that you exist and be able to help you. The British have been extremely helpful to all Commonwealth students studying in places where there is no embassy for that Commonwealth country, but of course the British have embassies in practically every country on earth. If they don't have a full embassy, they would have a consulate. But as soon as you arrive in a country like that, if you get there strange, no Vincentians around, find out, and you just have to open a phone book, find out the British Embassy, call them, arrange by appointment to go there with all your documents, and they will take note of all your particulars, and you keep in touch with them, so that in case of problems, they would at least be able to contact the government of St. Vincent or High Commission of St. Vincent and Grenadines or an embassy of St. Vincent and Grenadines and keep track. You see, these are days when self-preservation is very important, and personal safety is more important than it used to be in the days when I was a student. And speaking about that, in 1967, I hitchhiked alone from Saskatoon to Montreal. Took me 2.5 days on the road with a sign on my back, Foreign Student Expo, because I wanted to go to Expo 67 in Montreal, had no money, and decided to hitchhike way across Canada. Now, I wouldn't dream to encourage anybody to do that these days. In fact, the authorities would warn you that hitchhiking is now dangerous. In the days when I did it in 67, you know, yeah, there was always a danger, but you felt, well, you know, that the good Lord would take care of you, and he took care of me. But I look back and now I said I must have been half crazy. But wherever you go these days, even in the Caribbean, you have to take steps for your personal security. Be careful of people before you trust them. Follow good common sense practices. If you are living in a dormitory with students, avoid going out alone in the night, whether you're a man or woman, especially if you're a woman. Be very, very careful. You go to social functions now, and if you're a woman, somebody could slip something in your drink. Be very, very careful. If you're going out, make sure you let acquaintances know where you're going. If there's a telephone there, give them a telephone, let them know what time you're likely to be back, so that if you're not back by that time and an hour passes, 2 hours, somebody could raise the alarm. These are not days when you can take things for granted. Now, let me deal specifically with financial difficulties. As I said before, unless you come from a rich family who can look after all your needs, from time to time as a student abroad, you will run into financial problems. Your funds have not yet arrived, and the date of payment of your bills has arrived. It is not easy to find persons to borrow money from, and even so, you have to be extremely careful. So be careful and be very economical with whatever few cents or dollars or whatever currency you have. And for you who are traveling for the first time outside the Caribbean to study, you would probably be going with a reasonable amount of money to take care of yourself for the first year of for your tuition and food and books and so on. Now, don't make the mistake of splurging and, the first time you go to the city center or to a shopping mall, your eyes light up because you've seen all the things that you saw on TV advertised, all the things you think you wanted, and you have some money in your pocket, and you figure, well, look, let me buy this and so on, because by the time my next allowance comes, I'll have enough. Oh, no. Hold on to your money. Budget wisely. Only buy the things which are absolutely essential. Go and put your money in a bank. Don't let people know you have money, otherwise they will want to borrow it from you. And borrowing in inverted commas mean you're hardly likely to get it back. So that if you go shopping, try not to take a credit card with you. In fact, when you're a student, you should avoid having a credit card, period. But if you must have one, it should be a debit card, so you could only take out what you already have. But if you go shopping, walk with as little money as you can possibly walk with. See things that you want and leave them aside. And if for no other reason, that later on, as you get to know the place better, you will find the same item you saw in the first week that you're in that country at half the price that you saw it first. So if you think something is cheap, give yourself a month in that country. You'll find places where it is much cheaper than where you saw it first. So hold on to your money. Only spend what you really have to. Depending on where you are living, get yourself a proper dietary plan and stick to it. Don't go and splurge on expensive foodstuffs and so on, which may not be good for you. You see, at the bottom of it, be sensible. Use common sense. Think before you act. Keep in touch with folks at home. And these days, keeping in touch is as simple as texting something in a cell phone. In the days when I studied abroad, cell phones are not invented yet. When I was in Canada, a letter took about 2 weeks to get to St. Vincent, and naturally the reply it took the same 2 weeks. I couldn't afford telephone calls. In any case, my people at home had no telephone. Nowadays, you can keep in touch by Skype and WhatsApp and all sorts of ways instantly. Keep in touch. Let your folks know how things are happening. But above all, take the Lord with you. And I will begin on that note when I do part 2 of this program next week, Monday night DP. So for you going abroad to study, especially out of the region, I will be addressing you on personal and spiritual matters next time. All right? Happy studies. So that is all from tonight's program of The Law and You, program number 872. I look forward to being of further service to you next week, Monday, DV, for another presentation in this public service nation-building series, The Law and You. Do have a pleasant week, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, boys and girls, and may the good Lord continue to bless us all.
The Law and You, a look at laws in St. Vincent and the Grenadines which affect our daily lives. The Law and You, presented by lawyer panel R. Campbell QC and brought to you on SVG-TV as a public service.